I'm Amelia, 32 female. I live in a city apartment that overlooks the skyline, a place I built for myself, piece by expensive piece, with my boyfriend, Philip. By day, I lead a design team at a major tech company, shaping how millions of people interact with the apps on their phones. But I never imagined that the quiet success I built in the background of my family's life would one day become the main event at the most chaotic Thanksgiving dinner imaginable. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Growing up, my world had a distinct center of gravity, and its name was Megan. My younger sister wasn't just the favorite. She was the sun around which our family planet, consisting of my mother Charlotte, my father Andrew, and me, dutifully orbited. Megan was the golden child, a title she wore as naturally as her perfectly coordinated outfits. Everything she did was a cause for celebration, every minor achievement a headline story at family gatherings. Her first steps, her first A-plus paper, her lead role in the high school play, these weren't just milestones, they were legends, recounted with reverence by my mother to anyone who would listen. My father, a quiet accountant named Andrew, would just nod along, his pride evident in the soft smile he reserved exclusively for her. I, Amelia, was the other child. The quiet one, the responsible one, the one who was just there. I was the reliable, low-maintenance background character in the Megan show. My achievements were met with a polite, "Oh, that's nice, dear," before the conversation inevitably circled back to Megan's latest triumph. This dynamic wasn't born of malice, at least not in the beginning. It was a slow, creeping reality that solidified over years. Megan was bubbly, charming, and effortlessly social. I was introverted, studious, and more comfortable with a book or a computer screen than with a crowd. My parents, particularly my mother, found Megan's personality easier to understand and celebrate. She was a reflection of the daughter they had always imagined. I was an anomaly, a puzzle they didn't have the patience to solve. So they simply put me on a shelf, dusting me off when necessary but mostly leaving me to my own devices. This benign neglect taught me one of life's most valuable lessons early on: self-reliance. If I wanted something, I had to get it myself. If I achieved something, the only person who would truly celebrate it was me. So I poured my energy into the one place where the rules were clear and the results were directly tied to effort: my computer. While Megan was at cheerleading practice, I was learning to code. While she was being crowned prom queen, I was building my first websites for local businesses, earning my own money, and quietly laying the foundation for my future. My parents saw my passion for technology as a quirky hobby. "Oh, Amelia is always tinkering with her gadgets," my mother would say with a dismissive wave of her hand. They never asked what I was building or why it fascinated me. When I got a full scholarship to a prestigious university for a program in human-computer interaction, they were pleased, but their reaction was muted. It was overshadowed by the drama of Megan choosing a local state college to become a teacher because she didn't want to be too far from home. Her decision was framed as a noble sacrifice, a testament to her deep family values. My decision to accept a scholarship hundreds of miles away was seen as me being distant and a little selfish. The narrative was set in stone. Megan was the heart of the family, and I was the distant, cerebral satellite. This theme continued into our professional lives. Megan became a high school English teacher, a profession my mother lauded as incredibly important and selfless. I went into the chaotic, high-stakes world of tech. When I tried to explain my job as a UX/UI designer, their eyes would glaze over. "So, you make the buttons on the apps look pretty?" my dad once asked, and that became the family's official, simplified definition of my career. It was easier than trying to understand the complex systems I designed, or the impact my work had on millions of users. The pedestal they built for Megan wasn't just made of praise, it was fortified with financial support. When she wanted a new car after graduation, they co-signed the loan without a second thought. When she decided she wanted to spend a summer finding herself in Europe, they funded the trip. Her rent, her bills, her spontaneous shopping sprees, there was always a safety net, woven from our parents' savings and adoration. Meanwhile, I was paying my own way. I worked part-time jobs through college, lived in a tiny apartment with 3 roommates after graduation, and carefully managed every dollar I earned. I never asked are there help, partly out of pride, but mostly because I knew the answer would be a strained lecture about budgeting, followed by a suggestion to be more like your sister and choose a stable path. The irony was that my unstable path was already earning me more than they could imagine, but I never spoke of it. My salary, my bonuses, and especially my stock options were a private matter. Sharing my success with them felt pointless. It would either be misunderstood or, worse, dismissed. It was my secret, a quiet rebellion against their narrative. Philip, my boyfriend and a brilliant software engineer, was the only one who understood. He saw the condescension I faced and the quiet strength I had built in response. One day, he'd often say, holding my hand after a particularly frustrating phone call with my mother, "They're going to have to see you. Not the version of you they've invented, but the real you." I would just smile and shake my head, convinced that day would never come. To them, I would always be the afterthought, the quiet girl who was good with computers. The pedestal was built for one, and my feet were firmly planted on the ground, a place where I had learned to thrive on my own. I had made my peace with it, or so I thought. I had accepted my role and built a life far away from the shadow of my sister's golden glow. I believed I was immune to the sting of their casual dismissiveness, that I had built up a callus around that old childhood wound. But I was wrong. The foundation of that peace was more fragile than I knew, and it was about to be shattered by a single, condescending request that would set in motion the most significant confrontation of our lives. The call came on a Tuesday evening. I was at my desk, sketching out a wireframe for a new app feature, with Philip cooking dinner in our open-plan kitchen. The scent of garlic and basil filled the air, a comfortable backdrop to my focused work. My phone buzzed, displaying my mother's name, Charlotte. I felt the familiar, low-level tension uncoil in my stomach, a conditioned response from years of conversations that always felt like walking through a minefield of unspoken expectations. I took a deep breath and answered with a cheerful, "Hey, Mom." Her voice was a symphony of forced casualness. "Amelia, darling, how are you? I hope I'm not interrupting your computer thing." There it was, the casual, almost unconscious dismissal of my career. I gritted my teeth and smiled into the receiver. "It's going well, Mom. We're about to eat dinner. What's up?" She launched into a 10-minute monologue about her garden club, my father's golf game, and of course Megan. Megan had just been named Teacher of the Month. Megan had adopted a rescue cat. Megan was thinking of redecorating her living room. I made the appropriate murmurs of encouragement, my mind drifting back to the user flow diagram on my screen. Finally, she got to the point. Her tone shifted from breezy to serious, the verbal equivalent of leaning in to share a secret. "Honey, the real reason I'm calling is about your sister. She's found the most perfect little house. It's in a wonderful neighborhood, close to her school. It's everything she's ever wanted." I knew what was coming. It was the same pattern, a different verse of the same old song. "That's great, Mom. I'm so happy for her." "Well, yes, but there's a small issue," she continued, her voice laced with manufactured drama. "The down payment. With the market being what it is, she's just a little short. Your father and I have helped as much as we can, but we're a bit stretched thin right now." The silence that followed was heavy with expectation. I stayed quiet, refusing to volunteer for the role she had cast me in. Philip had stopped chopping vegetables and was now leaning against the counter, watching me with a knowing, sympathetic look. "Amelia, are you there?" my mother prodded. "Yes, I'm here, so she needs more money for the down payment?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "Exactly," she said, relieved that I had finally caught on. "And we were all thinking, you've always been so good with your money, so responsible. We were wondering if you could help your sister out. Just a loan, of course. Maybe around, say, $20,000. It would make all the difference for her. It would mean the world to us to see her settled and happy." $20,000. She said it so casually, as if she were asking me to pass the salt. The request itself wasn't what stung. It was the assumption behind it. The unspoken belief that my money, my hard-earned security, was a family resource to be tapped for Megan's benefit. It was the idea that my role was to be the sensible, financially stable support system for the real star of the family. I had spent a decade working 60-hour weeks, navigating a competitive and often brutal industry, making smart investments, and living below my means to build the life I had. My savings weren't just a number in a bank account. They were a testament to my discipline and foresight, a monument to the self-reliance they had forced upon me. And now, they wanted to chip a piece off it to adorn Megan's pedestal. "Mom," I began, choosing my words carefully, "I'm not comfortable loaning that amount of money. It's a huge sum, and mixing family and finances like that is always complicated." Her response was immediate, a sharp intake of breath followed by a tone dripping with disappointment. "Oh, I see. I just thought you're doing so well with your little computer job. I didn't think it would be such a burden. Megan is a teacher, Amelia. She doesn't make the kind of money you do. She chose a noble profession, not a lucrative one. Some of us prioritize helping others over getting rich." The insult was so perfectly crafted, so deeply wounding, it almost took my breath away. My little computer job. The implication that my success was somehow less noble, less worthy than my sister's chosen career. She had no idea what getting rich even looked like for me. To her, I was just a girl who made a decent salary, not someone who had, through a combination of skill, timing, and luck with stock options, accumulated a level of wealth that would make their heads spin. "My job is not little, Mom," I said, my voice colder than I intended. "And my decision has nothing to do with nobility. It's a boundary for me. I don't lend large sums of money to anyone, family included." The rest of the conversation was a blur of her wounded sighs and passive-aggressive comments. She painted me as selfish, as unsupportive, as someone who had forgotten the meaning of family. By the time I hung up, my hands were shaking. Philip put his arms around me. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "You handled that perfectly." But I didn't feel perfect. I felt that old, familiar ache of being fundamentally misunderstood. The next day, I got a text from Megan. "Mom told me you wouldn't help. I guess I shouldn't be surprised. It must be nice to have so much money you can just sit on it while your own sister struggles." I didn't reply. What could I say? How could I explain that the $20,000 they saw as a simple loan felt to me like a tax on my success, a penalty for not being the daughter they preferred? The incident was a turning point. It wasn't just another small cut. It was a deep, gaping wound. It was the moment I realized that my peace was a sham. I hadn't moved on. I had just been hiding. And I knew, with a sudden, chilling certainty, that I couldn't hide forever. The dismissal of my life's work and the entitlement to its fruits had ignited a slow-burning fire within me. For the first time, I didn't just want to be left alone. I wanted to be seen. Truly seen. And I started to wonder what it would take for that to finally happen. The term inheritance usually conjures images of reading a will in a stuffy lawyer's office, of being bequeathed a treasured family heirloom or a sum of money from a departed loved one. My inheritance was different. It arrived not via a legal document, but through a company-wide email on a sunny Wednesday afternoon. It wasn't from a person, but from a corporation. And it wasn't an inheritance of the past, but a key to a future I had been meticulously building in secret. The email was from our CEO, announcing that our company, a tech startup I had joined in its early days, was going public. The IPO, or initial public offering, was scheduled for the end of the quarter. For most employees, this was exciting news, a validation of our hard work. For me, and a handful of other early employees, it was the financial equivalent of a meteor strike. When I had joined the company 5 years prior, it was a risky move. I left a stable, well-paying job for a chaotic, unproven venture. Part of the compensation package, designed to lure talent willing to take such a gamble, was a significant number of stock options. These options were essentially the right to buy company shares at a ridiculously low strike price. For years, they were just pieces of digital paper, a theoretical promise of wealth that might never materialize. We all knew that most startups fail. But we believed in the product, and I poured my heart and soul into designing an intuitive, beautiful user experience that I knew would be the key to our success. I had watched the company grow from a 20-person team in a cramped office to a global force with thousands of employees. My role had grown with it. I was now a lead designer, managing a team of brilliant creatives, and my work was central to the company's identity. I had earned my place and the compensation that came with it. Over the years, my stock options had vested, meaning they were officially mine to exercise. But their actual value was purely speculative, tied to the theoretical worth of a private company. The IPO changed everything. Suddenly, these theoretical shares were about to be assigned a tangible value on the open market. Philip and I spent that evening at our dining table, a bottle of celebratory wine between us, hunched over a laptop. He, being a software engineer at a publicly traded company himself, understood the mechanics far better than I did. We ran the numbers based on the projected opening share price. We calculated the value of my vested options, subtracting the cost to exercise them. The number that stared back at us from the spreadsheet was so large it seemed fictional. It was a life-altering figure that made my hands tremble. After taxes, after all was said and done, my net worth was about to cross the $12 million mark. $12 million, I whispered, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. Amelia, this is incredible, Philip said, his eyes wide with awe. This is everything you've worked for. All those late nights, all the stress, all the times you felt like you were screaming into a void. This is the result. We didn't celebrate in a loud, boisterous way. It was a quiet, profound moment of realization. This wasn't lottery winnings. It wasn't a lucky break. It was the direct result of a decade of relentless work, of betting on myself when no one else in my family did, of pouring my passion into a field they didn't even try to understand. This inheritance was the validation I had stopped seeking from my parents years ago. It was proof, in the most undeniable language the world understands, money, that my little computer job was more significant than they could ever comprehend. In the weeks that followed, as the IPO date approached, I lived in a strange dual reality. On the one hand, I was having meetings with financial advisors and wealth managers, discussing investment strategies, trust funds, and tax implications. I was making decisions that would shape the rest of my life, securing a future of complete financial independence for myself and for Philip. It was a world of immense privilege and responsibility, and I took it very seriously. On the other hand, my interactions with my family remained stubbornly, painfully the same. I spoke to my mother on the phone a week after the IPO was announced in the news. It was a major tech story, covered by all the big financial outlets. "Did you see the news about my company going public?" I asked, a small, hopeful part of me thinking this might finally break through. "Oh, is that right?" she replied distractedly. "That's nice, dear. Anyway, I was calling to tell you that Megan's school is having a bake sale to raise money for new library books. She's in charge of the whole thing, can you believe it? She's such a natural leader." Click. The door to their understanding slammed shut once again. My life-changing news was just a nice, little tidbit, a speed bump on the conversational highway leading straight back to Megan. It was in that moment, listening to my mother praise Megan for organizing a bake sale while I was quietly managing an 8-figure net worth, that the absurdity of my situation crystallized. They didn't see me. They couldn't. They were so blinded by the glow of the pedestal they had built for my sister that I had become completely invisible. The anger I'd felt after the down payment incident returned, but this time it was different. It wasn't hot and impulsive. It was cold, clear, and sharp. It was the birth of a resolve. The money wasn't just security anymore. It was power. It was a tool. It was a truth bomb waiting to be detonated. And I was beginning to realize that the only way for them to finally see me was to witness the explosion. The old Amelia would have kept her inheritance a secret forever, content to live her life in private peace. But the old Amelia had been chipped away by 1,000 tiny dismissals, and the down payment demand had been the final blow. A new Amelia was emerging, one who was tired of being an afterthought. And she knew exactly where the detonation would have the most impact. The one place where family drama was always served as the main course, the Thanksgiving dinner table. The $12 million didn't appear overnight. It was the culmination of a decade of quiet, relentless accumulation, not just of wealth, but of skill, discipline, and independence. This journey began in my dorm room in college, long before stock options were even a concept in my vocabulary. While Megan was using the allowance our parents sent her for social events and new clothes, I was using my scholarship stipend to buy textbooks and coding manuals. I took a work-study job in the university's IT department, not for the pocket money, but for the access to servers and software I couldn't afford on my own. It was there, in the hum of the server rooms late at night, that I truly learned my craft. I taught myself new programming languages, experimented with design principles, and built a portfolio of projects that went far beyond my coursework. Every dollar I earned from freelance web design gigs went into a savings account. I lived on instant noodles and cheap coffee, not out of absolute necessity, but out of a fierce, burning desire to be completely untethered. I had seen how my parents used financial support as a tool of control and validation with Megan, and I wanted no part of it. My financial independence was my shield. It was the one part of my life they couldn't touch, comment on, or try to manage. After graduation, I moved to the city and landed my first real job at a small digital agency. The pay was modest, but the experience was invaluable. I learned to work with clients, to defend my design choices, and to navigate the complex politics of a professional environment. I shared a cramped apartment with roommates, rode the bus to work, and packed my own lunch every day. My lifestyle was a stark contrast to Megan's. She had moved into a charming apartment, subsidized by our parents, and her social media was a curated gallery of brunches, vacations, and boutique shopping trips. When we spoke, she would often offer me pitying advice. "You should really let loose a little, Amelia," she'd say. "You work too hard. Life is meant to be enjoyed." I would just smile and nod, never bothering to explain that my work was my passion and that the life I was building was its own form of enjoyment. I was playing the long game. Every raise, every bonus was meticulously allocated. I followed the simple principles of personal finance: max out my retirement contributions, keep a 6-month emergency fund, and invest the rest in low-cost index funds. I wasn't trying to get rich quick. I was building a foundation, brick by boring brick. My father, the accountant, would have been proud if he'd known, but I never told him. Our financial conversations were limited to him reminding me to file my taxes on time, assuming I was a typical 20-something living paycheck to paycheck. The real turning point was when I was recruited by the tech startup. The salary they offered was already a significant J. But the recruiter spent more time talking about the stock options. "This is where the real wealth is built," he had said. I spent weeks researching the company, its founders, and its market potential. It was a gamble, but a calculated one. I saw the genius in their product and the vision in their leadership. When I accepted the offer, I negotiated for a slightly lower salary in exchange for a larger block of options. It was a move that seemed foolish to anyone on the outside, but I was betting on the company's future, and by extension, my own. The first few years at the startup were a whirlwind. The hours were grueling, the pressure immense. We were a small, scrappy team trying to compete with giants. There were moments of doubt, times when our funding was low and morale was lower. But through it all, I focused on my work. I became obsessed with creating the perfect user experience. I fought for my ideas, backed them up with data, and earned the respect of my colleagues and the company's founders. As the company grew, so did my responsibilities and my compensation. More stock options were added to my package as rewards for my performance and loyalty. All the while, my family remained blissfully unaware. To them, I was just Amelia in the city, the daughter who was too busy with her computer job to make it to every family event. They saw my small apartment, my simple car, and my lack of designer clothes as evidence that I was doing fine, but certainly not spectacularly. They couldn't see the numbers growing in my brokerage account. They didn't understand that the modest apartment was a strategic choice to maximize my investment rate. They mistook my frugality for necessity, not discipline. This disconnect was never more apparent than during the holidays. Christmas gifts were always a source of quiet frustration. I would spend weeks picking out thoughtful, high-quality presents for them, a designer watch for my dad, a luxury spa package for my mom, a first edition of a classic novel for Megan. My gifts to them were often met with a polite but unenthusiastic thank you. From them, I would receive a generic gift card or a sweater that wasn't my style. It was a small thing, but it spoke volumes. They didn't know me well enough to choose a personal gift because they had never taken the time to learn who I had become. They didn't know my favorite authors, my taste in fashion, or the hobbies I enjoyed. They knew only the caricature they had created, the quiet, nerdy daughter who was the polar opposite of her vibrant, dazzling sister. The quiet accumulation was my secret rebellion. Every stock certificate that vested, every dividend that was reinvested, was a silent testament to my worth. The world was acknowledging my value in a very tangible way, even as my own family continued to overlook me. And as the company's IPO loomed, I knew the silence was about to be broken. The foundation I had so carefully and quietly built was about to cause a seismic shock, and the epicenter would be right in the middle of my mother's perfectly set Thanksgiving table. The weeks between the IPO and Thanksgiving were a strange, surreal limbo. My life had fundamentally changed. I was now, on paper and in reality, a multimillionaire. I had signed documents that made my head spin and had conversations with my wealth manager about things like philanthropic goals and estate planning. I could have quit my job, bought a yacht, and sailed around the world. Yet, on the surface, nothing was different. I still went to work every day. Philip and I still cooked dinner at home and debated what to watch on TV, and I still had the annual Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' house looming on the calendar. In previous years, I approached this event with a sense of weary resignation. It was an obligation to be endured, a day of navigating my mother's passive-aggressive comments, my father's benign neglect, and Megan's effortless command of the spotlight. This year felt different. This year, I had a secret. This year, I wasn't going as the quiet, overlooked daughter. I was going as a woman who held a life-altering truth, a bomb I could choose to detonate at any moment. The decision to reveal my financial situation wasn't made in a single moment of anger. It was a slow, deliberate choice that solidified in the wake of the down payment fiasco and my mother's subsequent dismissal of my career. It wasn't about revenge, not entirely. It was about reclamation. I wanted to reclaim my own narrative, to force them to see me as I was, not as the convenient, one-dimensional character they had cast me as for 32 years. It was a high-stakes gamble. The outcome was unpredictable. It could shatter our family forever. But the alternative, to continue living a lie, allowing them to treat me with casual condescension while I privately managed a fortune, felt like a betrayal of myself. Philip was my sounding board, my strategist, and my rock. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he asked one evening as we sat on our balcony overlooking the city lights. "Once you say it, you can't unsay it. Everything will change." "I know," I replied, my voice steady, "but everything has already changed for me. I can't keep pretending it hasn't. I'm tired of being graded on a curve against Megan. I'm tired of my life's work being called a little computer thing." They need to know. Not because I want to brag, but because I want them to finally understand why their judgment and their expectations have been so wrong. So we began to plan, not with malice, but with a kind of surgical precision. The reveal couldn't seem intentional or boastful. It had to emerge naturally as an unavoidable consequence of their own actions. We needed a catalyst, a trigger, and we knew exactly what it would be: Megan's financial struggles, the very topic that had started this firestorm. Megan had, of course, not gotten the house. The $20,000 I had refused to loan her was a real barrier. For weeks leading up to the holiday, my mother's phone calls were filled with mournful updates about how Megan was so heartbroken and struggling so much. It was a guilt trip of epic proportions, designed to make me feel like the villain who had single-handedly crushed my sister's dreams. This was our opening. The plan was simple. Philip and I would go to Thanksgiving dinner. We would be polite, we would be pleasant, and we would wait. We knew that, inevitably, the conversation would turn to Megan's housing situation, and by extension, my selfishness. My mother would orchestrate it, trying to use the public forum of the dinner table to shame me into submission. When the topic arose, Philip would be the one to gently steer it. He would ask innocent, probing questions about the housing market, about mortgages, about financial planning. He would play the part of the concerned, helpful boyfriend, leading them down a path of their own making. My only role was to be ready with the truth. I didn't rehearse a speech. I didn't plan a dramatic monologue. I just had to be prepared to state the facts of my life plainly and without apology. On the morning of Thanksgiving, as I got dressed, I felt a strange calm. I chose a simple, elegant but unassuming outfit, a cashmere sweater and dark jeans. I wanted my appearance to be a non-factor. I didn't want them to be able to say I was showing off. This wasn't about flash, it was about substance. We drove to my parents' house, the same suburban home I had grown up in. The car was filled with the scent of the expensive pies we had picked up from a gourmet bakery, a small, subtle signal that we weren't the struggling young couple they imagined. As we walked up the driveway, I saw my parents through the front window, fussing over the table setting. I saw Megan's car, the one they had helped her buy, parked in its usual spot. It all looked so normal, so unchanged. It was the tableau of my entire life, but I was no longer the same person who had left this house for college over a decade ago. I was walking into the heart of my past, armed with the power to completely redefine my future. The table was being set for a Thanksgiving feast, but I knew we were all gathering for a reckoning. The main course wouldn't be turkey, it would be the truth, and I was no longer afraid of how it would taste. The first 2 hours of Thanksgiving were a masterclass in my family's typical dynamic. My mother, Charlotte, fluttered around the kitchen, issuing commands disguised as suggestions. My father, Andrew, sat in his armchair, watching football with the volume just high enough to discourage conversation. And Megan, my sister, held court in the living room, regaling our parents with dramatic stories from her classroom, casting herself as a heroic figure shaping the minds of the next generation. I played my part, helping set the table and offering to mash the potatoes, while Philip charmed my mother by praising her cooking. The air was thick with the aroma of roasted turkey and unspoken tensions. The seating arrangement at the dinner table was, as always, strategic. My father sat at the head, with Megan, the guest of honor, to his right and my mother to his left. Philip and I were seated opposite them, as if we were a visiting delegation. The meal began with the usual pleasantries. The turkey was praised, the stuffing was complimented, and my father made his annual toast to family and good health. The conversation, steered by my mother, soon found its intended target. "It's just so wonderful to have everyone here," she began, dabbing her lips with a napkin. "Though I do wish we had more to be thankful for this year. Poor Megan has had such a stressful time with this house situation." She shot me a look over her wine glass, a clear signal that the performance was beginning. Megan sighed dramatically. "Oh, it's fine, Mom. I'll just have to keep renting forever, I guess. Some of us just aren't lucky enough to have careers where you can afford to buy a house in this market." The jab was aimed directly at me, a poisoned dart coated in self-pity. This was the moment. Philip, ever the calm strategist, set down his fork. "The market is really tough right now," he said sympathetically. "We were just looking at some real estate listings for fun the other day. Even with a good dual income, getting a mortgage for the kind of place you want can be a huge challenge. The banks want to see a lot of liquidity." My father, whose interest was piqued by the mention of banks and mortgages, finally looked up from his plate. "That's the truth. Your debt-to-income ratio is everything, and you need a solid 20% down minimum." My mother saw her opening to corner me. "Well, that's the thing," she said, her voice dripping with meaning. "Megan could have had the down payment. She had the perfect house picked out, but she was just a little short, and unfortunately, some people aren't willing to help out their own family." The entire table fell silent. 3 pairs of eyes were fixed on me. The old Amelia would have shrunk under their collective gaze, stammering an apology or trying to defend herself. But I was not the old Amelia. I took a calm sip of water, placed my glass down gently, and looked directly at my mother. "That's right, I wasn't willing to loan her the money," I said, my voice even and clear. "It was $20,000, Megan, wasn't it?" Megan scoffed. "As if you don't have it, don't pretend you're struggling, Amelia. We all know your tech job pays well." "You're right," I said. "It does pay well. But you seem to have a fundamental misunderstanding of my financial situation and my relationship with money." This was Philip's cue. Well, for what it's worth, he interjected, turning to my father, our financial advisor has always said that personal loans to family are one of the quickest ways to ruin relationships. He's very strict about it with us. My father nodded, the voice of a professional advisor carrying more weight than mine ever could. A good advisor would say that, but my mother wouldn't let it go. Advisor? Oh, that's rich. You too have a financial advisor. How much money could you possibly have that you need an advisor? She asked with a condescending laugh. I let the question hang in the air for a moment, then I looked at Philip, who gave me a subtle, encouraging nod. I turned my gaze back to my parents and my sister. That's actually a fair question, I said. I've never talked about my finances with you because, frankly, you've never shown any interest. You just assumed you knew. You assumed I was doing okay. You called my career a little computer thing. You accused me of being selfish for not handing over $20,000 like it was pocket change. I leaned forward slightly, my voice dropping but gaining intensity. I joined my company when it was a high-risk startup. I took a gamble and worked incredibly hard for years. When the company went public earlier this year, my stock options, which were part of my compensation, became liquid. After exercising my options and paying the taxes, my net worth is now approximately $12 million. The silence that followed was absolute. It was so profound I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. My father's fork, halfway to his mouth, clattered onto his plate. My mother's perfectly made-up face went slack, her jaw literally dropping. And Megan's face was a storm of disbelief, cycling rapidly through confusion, shock, and then pure, unadulterated rage. She was the first to speak, her voice a low hiss. You're lying. I'm not, I said simply. Philip helps me manage the portfolio. Our advisor is from one of the largest wealth management firms in the country. Megan slammed her hand on the table, making the silverware jump. Her voice rose to a shrill scream that echoed through the house. $12 million? You have $12 million and you wouldn't give me $20,000? What is wrong with you? My mother, Charlotte, finally snapped out of her stupor. Her face crumpled and she began to cry, not tears of joy for my success, but tears of horrified confusion. 12 million, Amelia, how? She whispered, looking at me as if I were a stranger. What kind of person sits on that much money and lets her sister lose her dream home? My father, Andrew, just sat there, pale and utterly silent. He stared at me, then at Megan, then at my mother, his accountant's brain visibly struggling to process a number so far outside his reality. He looked like he had been struck by lightning. This wasn't about the $20,000, I said, my voice cutting through Megan's screaming and my mother's sobs. This was about respect. This was about being seen as more than just Megan's quiet, odd-job sister. You never once asked about my work. You never celebrated my successes. You just dismissed me, but you felt perfectly entitled to the fruits of that success. The money didn't change who I am, it just revealed who all of you are. Megan stood up so abruptly her chair scraped loudly against the wood floor. I can't even look at you, she spat, her face twisted with fury and envy. She stormed out of the dining room, and a moment later, we heard the front door slam shut. My mother was now weeping uncontrollably into her napkin. My father hadn't moved a muscle. He just sat there, staring at the half-eaten turkey on his plate, a man whose entire worldview had just been dismantled between the appetizer and the main course. The Thanksgiving dinner was over. The truth was on the table, and it was a mess. The slam of the front door echoed in a house that was suddenly cavernous and silent. The only sound was my mother's ragged sobbing. Philip reached across the table and placed his hand on mine, a small, grounding gesture in the wreckage. My father still hadn't spoken. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him, shrunken in his chair at the head of the table. The feast before us was cold, a mocking testament to a family tradition that had just been irrevocably broken. I looked at my mother. Her tears weren't for me, for my incredible achievement, or for the years she had overlooked me. They were tears of confusion and, I suspected, of shame. Her carefully constructed world, with its simple narrative of the perfect daughter and the other one, had been shattered. She had been publicly confronted with the magnitude of her misjudgment. I should have told you, I said softly, not as an apology, but as a statement of fact. I should have been more open about my life. But every time I tried, you turned the conversation back to Megan. You never wanted to hear it. My mother looked up, her makeup streaked. "We just wanted her to be happy," she whispered, as if that explained everything. "And am I not we?" I asked, the question hanging in the air. Did my happiness not matter? She had no answer. She just shook her head and dissolved back into tears. It was my father who finally broke his silence. He cleared his throat, a dry, rasping sound. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw not a passive observer, but a man grappling with a profound failure. 12 million, he said, his voice barely audible. It wasn't a question, it was a statement of awe and disbelief. "You did that on your own." "I did," I confirmed. He nodded slowly, his accountant's mind finally processing the reality behind the number. He had spent his life balancing ledgers, meticulously tracking modest sums, teaching his daughters the value of $1. And all that time, one of them had been operating on a scale he couldn't even fathom. He didn't look angry like Megan or distraught like my mother. He looked humbled. The immediate aftermath was a quiet, awkward exit. Philip and I cleared our plates, packed up the gourmet pies that had never been served, and said our goodbyes. My mother couldn't look at me. My father just stood in the doorway and said, "Drive safe, Amelia." It was the most direct thing he'd said to me all night. The days that followed were defined by a deafening silence. My mother didn't call. Megan blocked my number. The family group chat went dormant. It was as if the shockwave from my revelation had vaporized all normal communication. Philip was my sanctuary. "You did the right thing," he assured me constantly. "It was going to come out eventually. This was just on your terms." A week later, I received a long, rambling email from my father. It was a stilted, awkward message, but it was the most honest communication I'd ever received from him. He wrote that he was shocked and ashamed that he had never understood my career or my life. He admitted that they had put all their focus on Megan because she had always seemed to need them more. He apologized for his passivity, for letting my mother drive the family narrative without question. He didn't ask for forgiveness, and he didn't ask for money. He just wanted me to know that he was thinking. It was a start. My mother took longer. About a month after Thanksgiving, she called. Her voice was hesitant, stripped of its usual breezy confidence. She didn't apologize, not directly. Instead, she asked questions. Tentative, curious questions about my job. "So, what is it you actually design?" she asked. I spent an hour on the phone with her, patiently explaining the concepts of user flow, wireframing, and accessibility. She didn't understand all of it, but for the first time in my life, she was actually listening. It was the first brick in building a new, more honest relationship. Megan was a different story. The chasm between us was too deep, filled with years of jealousy and entitlement that had now hardened into bitter resentment. She sent me one final, vitriolic text message a few weeks after Thanksgiving, accusing me of ruining her life and intentionally humiliating her. She said she never wanted to see me again. I didn't reply. I had to accept that my relationship with my sister was a casualty of the truth. Maybe one day she would understand, but I couldn't build my future around that hope. Life settled into a new normal. Philip and I used a portion of the money to start a foundation that provides scholarships for women entering the tech field. We bought a beautiful home, not far from the city, with a garden and a studio for me to work in. It was a home we built together, on our own terms. The following Thanksgiving, we hosted dinner at our new house. I invited my parents. After a long hesitation, they accepted. It was awkward and quiet, but it was a beginning. There was no pedestal for a golden child. There was no invisible daughter. There were just 3 adults trying to find their way back to each other on a new, more level ground. My wealth didn't buy me happiness, but it bought me freedom. The freedom to live my life authentically, to demand the respect I deserved, and to redefine my place in my own family. The pedestal that once dominated our lives is gone. In its place is a much larger, more complicated, and ultimately more honest table, with room for everyone to be seen for who they truly are. And for that, I am truly thankful.